When you think like an athlete, setbacks don't stop you. But mindset alone doesn't get you moving again. That's where Icy Hot steps in. Ice works fast. Heat makes it last. So when the rest of the world settles because of a setback, Icy Hot accelerates your comeback with fast-acting, powerful pain relief. Icy Hot. You're so back.
The other day, I'm at the passport office. I'm rocking the day 4 hair pulled up into a greasy, I give the fuck up ponytail. Zero makeup, yoga pants, and a sweater so beaten up, Value Village wouldn't even take it. Naturally, this is when a woman decides to ask me for my fashion advice. I don't know if I mentioned my age or my podcast first, but suddenly we're trauma bonding over the fact that getting dressed in our 50s is like trying to gift wrap a bowl full of Jell-O. She told me her clothes just don't fit anymore, and honestly, relatable. It's not even necessarily about weight gain. It's the great migration. Your body is just shifting. A loss of collagen distribution here, a little gravity drop there, a general softening of the soul. The sag is real. Look, I'm a hair and makeup artist, not a tailor, but I know when a fabric is lying to me. Jersey is our best friend, but not that 3 washes and it's a dishcloth fast fashion crap. Understanding designer silhouettes is a plus. You have to know who the designer is designing for. And are they designing for a stick or someone who loves life and enjoying the odd cheese plate? For me, I love Norma Kamali and found recent success with Reese. Also, can we talk about bra architecture? Because my success lately has been, and don't judge me, Skims. I'm not a Kardashian fan, but I finally found a fucking bra that actually works. I love their minimizer. Now, I don't have big boobs. They would probably be considered average, but what happens is the flesh affected by gravity likes to travel to other parts of my personal globe. So the fabric and wide bands of the Skims bra, I hate to say it, amazing. I had a great bra from Victoria's Secret, but it was so overworn that I had to chuck it. They don't carry that style anymore and have ignored my email inquiries. Their bras really are made for those who have had a boob job or have never nursed a baby or aren't over the age of 50. When I was in Singapore, I loved Marks and Spencer bras because they understood the power of the wide band. We need structure. The hardest part about shopping now, the measurements. You're measuring for flesh that has succumbed to gravity. So if you're standing in a fitting room wondering why your measurements change depending on whether you're leaning forward or standing up or crumbled in the fetal position, spritz in hand, welcome to the club. Also, brands, if you're listening, put the fucking mirrors back into the change rooms. I don't care to step out of a change room to hear some part-time salesperson squealing for their commission. Also, yes, I gave the lovely woman at the passport office my podcast business card. If you found your way here, welcome to the Fuck You 50s. Welcome to the Fuck You 50s, the podcast for women who refuse to tolerate the bullshit anymore. This is real talk, real stories, and a long overdue reality check. I'm your host, Andrea Claire, and this podcast is the filter-free voice you've been waiting for, with a dose of F-bombs. The Fuck You 50s, unfiltered, unapologetic, and undeniably needed. My next guest, and also her second appearance on the podcast, is Tamara Gerdis, co-founder of Physio Down Under, a pelvic floor physiotherapy clinic based in Singapore. With over 20 years of experience and a zero tolerance policy for medical gaslighting, we love that, Tamara is stripping away the stigma and giving us the evidence-based toolkit we actually need. Our conversation dives deep into how the hormonal shifts of menopause, specifically the decline of estrogen, impact everything from bladder urgency to sexual discomfort. Tamara emphasizes that while symptoms like leakage or the invisible itch are common, they are not an inevitable part of aging. Or, in her words, common does not mean normal. It's time to stop crossing your legs when you sneeze and start taking notes. Tamara, welcome back to the Fuck You 50s.
I have been a physio for 25 years, qualified in South Africa in 1999, and then moved off to London, worked in the NHS. And when I arrived in Australia in 2004, I got a job at the Royal Hospital for Women in Sydney, and I started to specialize in women's health. Been doing women's health physiotherapy for over 20 years now. And then I went on to do my master's in continence and women's health and moved to Singapore in 2011 and started Singapore's first women's health physiotherapy, pelvic health physiotherapy clinic with Monica Donaldson. And that has just grown, and we now offer men's health and pediatric pelvic health as well. But this is all I do. Yeah.
I noticed too, because of course I follow your Physio Down Under Instagram account, and you seem to be having a lot of speakers that come in as well. And
Yeah.
is that kind of open to your clients, or?
It's a bit variable. The team has grown so much.
Yeah.
So we're now 11 physios and we've got 4 Pilates instructors. We try to do in-service training every month for the team. What we try to do is bring in experts, and we've got a fantastic referral network, a variety of sort of doctors, specialists, lactation consultants, personal trainers, nutritionists. That is just open to the team. But then we are doing a lot of educational talks, doing a lot of teen talks in schools. We're talking to adults in different settings. And that's public. Those are public settings. So I'm very, very passionate about education.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we hear so often is, why did nobody tell me? Why didn't I know? And I would love to change that.
Yeah. And obviously just talking about it just normalizes everything.
100%.
Yeah. After I had you on last year as one of my first guests on the podcast, my inbox was full. So many people were messaging me, telling me how much they appreciated it, just your information and how it made them feel normal. I know one of the things that you say is like, it's like normal.
It's common, but it's not normal.
Thank you. Common is not normal.
Yeah.
But that they just felt that they were not alone. So what's your advice to women in their 50s if they're still kind of struggling with like how to talk to an expert or their GP? Like what's your advice for that?
I know it's the first time that these women are talking about it, and I understand it can be quite intimidating and sometimes it can be quite embarrassing. But we really have heard it all before. Sometimes when women sit here and next to me and they say to me, I need to tell you something, but I think it's too much information. And I go, please try to tell me something I haven't heard before. Like, please.
Yeah.
Really, we haven't. And doctors will be in the same position. And I think what I always hope as a professional is that if it is out of your scope of practice, that you then refer them on to the relevant person. So I can't guarantee that people are always going to be able to say, oh, I know exactly how to manage that. But, we have a lot of women who are postnatal and are going through some postnatal depression. And clearly that is out of my scope of practice. But I don't sit here and go, oh, no, we can't talk about that. I will give them names of counselors. And it would be the same with any thing that they're experiencing with their body that's out of my scope of practice. So I think it's just about making sure you're in a confidential setting, making sure you're speaking to a professional, someone who's well qualified, and then just saying it. And then they will lead you. If somebody says to me, look, I'm having a few difficulties controlling my bowels, I'm then going to go, okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that? When does that happen? We'll lead them, we'll guide them. So it's just about having that courage to say it. And I promise you, we've heard it before.
I feel that some people they're a bit shy, so they kind of almost self-diagnose by listening to other people's stories. And it's all individual too, right? Like whatever the cause, the root of your issue is, might not be the story that I've told or someone else has told. I know we talked before about they were just getting past the whole like doing your Kegels. So has anything kind of really changed in pelvic floor health over the past year since we last spoke?
Look, sometimes we now are getting a bit of extreme. I see on my Instagram feeds, Kegels are the devil. Like, absolutely don't do Kegels. And I think you've just got to take everything with a bit of pinch of salt. So just understanding that all Kegels are pelvic floor muscle exercises. Okay, so the word Kegel is named after the man who did the study about pelvic floor. And so they're called Kegels. And typically a Kegel would just be on, off, on, off, on, off. It's so much more nuanced than that. So your pelvic floor is literally the floor of your pelvis. It is part of your core. And so if it is not functioning well, it can impact many aspects of your body, not just your bladder control, your bowel control, your sexual stimulation, but it can impact your back, your hips, the way your tummy looks. There's so many aspects to it. So yes, if you have, and I think we'll probably end up talking about this quite a bit, is that pelvic floor muscles can be weak, but they can also be overactive. So they can also be too tight, and they can also be uncoordinated. So pelvic floor muscles are meant to switch on and switch off depending on what we're doing. And we really shouldn't have to overthink that.
Yeah.
But in somebody where it's become, your pelvic floor has become dysfunctional, all your muscles are too tight. Yes, doing on, off, on, off, on, off of your Kegels is going to make your symptoms worse. You do get these extremes with these Instagram pages saying, don't do Kegels. That is not the evidence. Actually, there's excellent evidence for doing pelvic floor muscle exercises correctly in the right manner and then integrating that with functional movements. So I think the only change, going back to your question, is that I think there's more people saying don't do it. And I disagree with that. I think that, I definitely have women coming in and I assess them and I say, at the moment, pelvic floor muscle exercises or Kegels are not for you. At the moment, we need to work on down training your pelvic floor, on relaxing your pelvic floor before we do any strengthening. But more often than not, overactive pelvic floor, so muscles that are too tight, are often weak, right?
Right.
So even when we start to get them to relax, at some point we usually have to start a bit of strengthening as well. But that needs to be monitored and guided.
Yeah.
So that's the main change that I've been seeing. But it's social media driven. It's not research driven.
Yeah. Social media can be such a blessing, but also a pain in the ass, right? It's, a lot of misinformation out there, which is also why I like to go to the experts for my podcast. So our bladder does kind of, at least for me anyway, becomes like a micromanaging boss, right? It kind of seemed to happen even before I turned 50. So is it a muscle? Is it a nervous system reaction, or is it kind of all?
So the bladder is a muscle. It's called the detrusor muscle. But it's also got huge amounts of sensory inputs and outputs. So it's a combination. But really, when the system is working well, is we should be able to check in at any point as to how much urine is inside our bladder. And we have estrogen receptors within the bladder as well. So we actually have estrogen receptors in most of our organs in our body. But when we think about estrogen, often we think, it's just around the vagina. But we now know that, hormone replacement can help with brain and heart and all sorts of things. But we're talking about the bladder, the estrogen receptors within the bladder. So once we start going perimenopausal and menopausal and that estrogen starts to drop away, the bladder kind of gets a little bit oversensitized. And so it starts to interpret the urine inside the bladder like it's too much. It's almost like a bit of central sensitization that's happening. So the nervous system is kind of wound up a little bit. And that's when we start to develop this urgency. Now, when we talk about leaking of urine, we have two main types. So you've got your stress urinary incontinence, which is you leak when you sneeze, cough, jump. It's usually a pressure management issue. And then you've got your urge urinary incontinence. And that is where your bladder is getting overactive. So that is where you feel okay, you come home, you put the key in the door, and all of a sudden you need to pee. Or you need to pee, and you're walking to the toilet. As you see the toilet, you're like, I'm losing control. That urine's starting to come out. That is an overactive bladder. That's urge urinary incontinence. But you can have wet urgency, so where you're leaking, but you can also have dry urgency, which can also be really quite bothersome. It can be like, I really need to pee, but you're not actually leaking. That is very sensory. We treat them quite differently. So if you ever see a pelvic health physio, they will ask you lots of detailed questions to try to figure out what's going on. You can have a mixture of both. They don't necessarily have to happen in isolation. But we treat the urgency and the urge urinary incontinence quite sensory. So it's quite different to what we do for stress incontinence.
Right.
So yes, it's very much nervous system.
We just traveled to Italy, and we were hitting like over 10,000 steps a day. So this is kind of speaking to myself, but I'm sure some listeners are going to find it relatable as well. Why does increased activity sometimes make urgency worse instead of better?
Look, it's not one straightforward answer, but it's usually a case of your pelvic floor muscles are fatiguing. So because you out of your comfort zone, you probably walking more, you walking on uneven surfaces, and remembering that pelvic floor is part of your core, it's going to be working overtime. Now, can I use a model?
Yes, you can. I will clip it and put it on my Instagram for sure.
Okay. So I probably would have gone through this last time, but just remembering pelvis, so pubic bone in the front. And if we just turn that around, you've got your sacroiliac joints on each side, and you've got your tailbone over there. So if we're having a look underneath, you've got the clitoris right at the top. You've got your urethra where the urine comes out, vagina, anus, and so that's your back passage, superficial pelvic floor muscles. But if we look inside, you have got your deep pelvic floor muscles. We actually have 3 layers of pelvic floor. But what I want you to realize is that your bladder sits right in the front, like that, directly on top of those pelvic floor muscles. So if your pelvic floor muscles become overactive, they become thicker, that in itself can sort of rub on the bladder and give it different sort of messages and make you feel like you need to pee. But we know that if those muscles are too tight, overactive, it sends those funny messages to the bladder and makes you feel like you need to go. The other thing you need to remember is that when we travel, often we more have a tendency towards constipation, and the rectum and the bladder are actually quite close together. And so if we are constipated, that in itself can cause an increase in bladder urgency. The other thing is that our fluid intake becomes different when we travel. So you might drink less because you don't want to look for a toilet. And when we drink less, we make our urine more concentrated. Concentrated urine is more irritating to the bladder lining. There are different elements involved in this. Maybe you're drinking a little bit more coffee because you're in Italy and you want to drink the coffee. Coffee is a bladder stimulant. So, there's multiple things going on with that. If it was really bothersome for you, your bladder, and you knew you were going to Italy and you knew it was going to be a problem, like I would get you to train for that. You wouldn't just go from doing your usual daily stuff and then off you go to Italy and you do 10,000 steps. And it's like a completely new activity. Your body's not trained for it. You would need to train.
That makes sense. Honestly, instead of like training for a marathon or climbing Machu Picchu, it's like training for having your Chianti as you're walking on the cobblestone streets.
Perfect.
Yeah. It's so funny because it's not funny. When we were there, I guess it was like day 5 or 6, and like we literally were hitting over 10,000 steps a day. And I had the weirdest rash on my leg. I took a photo of it and I uploaded it to Google image search, and it came back with saying that and it was probably right, that it was Disney rash. And I know we shouldn't diagnose ourselves from Google, but it talks about Disney rash, and they called it that because of walking around theme parks, right? But it affects more women over 50 than anybody else. And I definitely was not drinking more water. Like I drink a ton of water all the time, but when I'm traveling and walking around a lot, I absolutely cut back on my water because, again, it's that trying to find a bathroom,
Right. And that has a huge impact. So clearly, obviously, the rash said it was something to do with that as well. But from a bladder perspective, as we mentioned, you're getting dehydrated. But remember, when we don't drink enough, we get constipated. It's this loop that just makes everything worse. And the number of women that say to me when they travel, they get constipated, and then it makes all their bladder symptoms worse, it's huge.
It's so fun being a girl. All these things we have to
Especially
put
over
up
the
with.
age of like 40, 45. It's like all these weird and wonderful things,
Yeah.
right?
Speaking about weird and wonderful things, there's something else that I was wondering about, like when I was kind of doing some more research to kind of pull from questions that I didn't ask you the first time. And this has been happening to me, so I can share all my stories. I love when people think that I do too much TMI as well. I shared this on my Instagram the other day, and I had like in my Instagram story, and so many women were messaging me. So it's a long build up to like the invisible itch, and it's around my vagina, and it's like so itchy. Like I honestly thought that I was getting yeast infections because I used to get them a lot when I was younger. So I just started like, here, you can buy the medication over the counter. So I started getting it and it seemed to help, but then it didn't. And I went to my GP and I was like, okay, like I feel like I'm going crazy. Like my vagina is itchy like all the time. And so she's looking, she did a couple like swabs, whatever, everything came back negative. And she's like, there's literally nothing there. I can't see anything. There's like nothing. And so doing some more research for our chat today, it talks about how that could be like a ghost symptom of like, of like nerves or something. Have you heard of this?
It's not something we see a lot. And honestly, if you did completely the right thing, because if I did have somebody come in and that's what they were complaining about, I would send them to like a specialist dermatologist who specializes in vulvas, because clearly we want to make sure we're not missing something. So that is, first of all, the main thing we want to do. But if all of that was cleared and there was nothing going on in terms of an infection or any skin rashes or anything like that, it can be from what we call the pudendal nerve being irritated. But once again, that would likely be due to a tight pelvic floor. And it can create these sort of like itchy symptoms. Sometimes you can get almost like a bit of tingling, burning. You can get that from the pudendal nerve being irritated.
Amazing. So much fun.
No, look, I don't see it a lot, I must be honest.
Yeah.
And as I said, if any of your listeners are experiencing that, the first port of call for that would be to see a trusted doctor first.
Yeah.
Then we could absolutely try pelvic floor releases and pelvic floor down training, and you should see an effect almost straight away. So it's not something where you'll need to go again and again and again and again to see. You should know pretty quickly if we're on the right track with that.
Okay, that's good to know. It's funny, when I posted it on my Instagram story, I had women that were like replying to it going, oh my God, yes, me too. So it's one of those things that I just think we have so many bizarre symptoms that we deal with perimenopause and menopause.
I'm saying I don't see a lot. And I wonder if what happens is women do go to the doctor and the doctor checks them and says, there's nothing wrong with you, you're fine, but it's not a known pelvic floor thing. And so doctors wouldn't necessarily think to send them to us. And that's probably why we're not seeing them so much.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely, we would actually be able to make a difference in that situation.
Yeah. So the other thing too about all the wonderful things that we have as middle-aged women, and a lot of women are frustrated about the menopause middle. And so with the lower belly, like paunch or pooch or whatever, is it actually a structural pelvic floor issue rather than just fat distribution?
There's a couple of things going on in menopause. So obviously our production of estrogen completely changes. And so rather than being this estradiol, which our ovaries are mainly producing, it changes to this different type of estrogen, which is called estrone, which are the weakest form of estrogen, but it's produced by fat. And it kind of becomes this like self-feeding loop with the belly fat, right? Which is why women tend to notice a little more fat in their belly. But what can happen in terms of the way we activate our core is we can make our belly look worse than what it really is. And this has all got to do with what we call pressure management. So the core is not your abdominal muscles only. It's actually a canister. So I've already mentioned the pelvic floor is the bottom part of the core, and then you've got your diaphragm, which is the top part of your core. You've got your deep abdominal muscles in the front, and you've got your deep back muscles in the back. But basically, what most women do is they want to have a flat belly. And so they walk around sucking their bellies in all day. And what happens is these upper abdominals get very strong and our lower abdominals remain weak. And I want you to imagine that if I take a belt and I cinch that in over here, I'm directing all that pressure down towards my pelvis, and I'm actually creating a belly shape, right? So if you cannot breathe with your diaphragm, so if I breathe always up here, that's upper chest breathing. That is not allowing my diaphragm to breathe. If you pop your head just below your ribs and you breathe into your belly, that's using your diaphragm. That's allowing those upper abdominal muscles to let go. And we can start to use the lower part of our core, our transversus abdominis muscles. So when I talk to my patients about this, because it's incredibly common, we talk about zipping from the pelvic floor up, like you're zipping up a tight pair of jeans. So gentle lift of the pelvic floor muscles, and then imagining you bringing the hip bones together. So it's sort of an up and in at your
Yeah.
pelvic, rather than just sucking your belly in. But absolutely, if you just suck and you are stronger in your upper abs, which most women are, especially women who've had babies, because when we're pregnant, those upper abdominals will stay in a shortened position and your lower abdominals are very stretched. Often, if we don't correct that post-pregnancy, it will not get better on its own. And so as we get older and we start to lay down a little bit more fat in our bellies just look bigger and bigger and bigger. So I can't say it's only a pressure management issue,
Right.
because we've
Yeah.
obviously got the effects of estrogen changing.
And everybody's different as well.
And everyone's different, and there's
Yeah.
obviously a certain genetic element to it. But absolutely, we can make the aesthetics better by the way we activate our abdominal muscles.
REI has ultralight backpacking gear. So for you gram counters and ounce shavers, we made this ad ultralight with a base weight of just 13 seconds. The next 17 seconds, pure trail. Find more with less in-store and at rei.com.
We gather here tonight to bring women back to their rightful place.
The Testaments, a new Hulu original series from the executive producers of The Handmaid's Tale.
It's easier to accept a story than believe that the people around you are monsters.
The battle isn't over.
There comes a time when you have to take action, when you have to choose your own destiny.
Never quite as it seems. Watch the new Hulu original series, The Testaments, streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
And it seems, too, that with more women talking about their experiences and what they're going through, then obviously it kind of expands that conversation. And then the medical field's going to pick it up and think, oh, okay, we need to also investigate all this more.
What's happened now with perimenopause and menopause, just in terms of when we're talking about hormone replacement, which is now called MHT, menopause hormone therapy, there's been a complete 180 in the last few years with all of that, because women are talking about it. Women are demanding it. Women are saying, I'm not accepting that my brain has to feel this way, that my sleep has to be so bad, that, my mood is terrible. And the evidence has caught up saying it's relatively safe. And now my patients, like so many of my patients, are on MHT. Whereas 5 years ago, you just couldn't get it. No one would give it to you. Yeah. So it's completely changing. And I agree with you that what's fantastic about all of this is that women are talking about their symptoms more, and women are advocating for their own health, and they're not just listening to what their mother told them or, what their best friend's experience is. They are kind of doing a little bit of their own research and figuring it out, which is just fantastic. It's what we need.
Absolutely. Is there like in some cases, is it with some women that are having pelvic floor issues where maybe it's just they need the MHT, or do you think they would always need some physiotherapy as well?
So it varies. So you want to know kind of like when it started. Sometimes, even though if women are symptomatic, like throughout most of their 30s or 40s, often those symptoms can get worse as we head into menopause, and then going to like menopause, often it can get worse. Definitely with the urgency that we were speaking about, if we can use topical vaginal estrogen, often that is really helpful. So systemic estrogen doesn't always have the positive impact that we're looking for on the bladder and the vaginal tissues. We usually need some topical vaginal estrogen. So in Singapore, that either comes in the form of a tablet that goes in the vagina, it's called Vagifem, and then you often get some cream. But often in this case, the tablet that goes in the vagina is really great for the vaginal tissues. So for women who are finding their vaginas are very dry during sex and uncomfortable, that is essential to replace the estrogen within the vagina. But if we can get some topical estrogen on the urethra, often that makes a huge difference to the urgency. Often.
Okay.
And in particular, what we know is that once we are over the age of menopause, we often are more predisposed to getting urinary tract infections, cystitis. And that is because the urethra is no longer sealing as well as it used to because of the lack of estrogen. And so the bacteria can get into the urethra much more easily and cause a UTI. So getting topical vaginal estrogen can actually help stop getting UTIs. Now, what we need to remember as well is that UTIs, thrush, vaginal infections, it upsets the whole vaginal microbiome. It irritates the pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor muscles are protective in nature. So if I've got an infection, if I've got pain, what do my pelvic floor muscles do? They switch on, they activate, they protect. So even when I've treated the UTI or I've treated the thrush, those muscles often don't just let go and relax. And so many women will say, I was absolutely fine. And then I had 2 or 3 episodes of repeated thrush that I couldn't get rid of, or I had a UTI that was just lingering. And even though those symptoms are gone, things still just don't feel right. My urgency is worse. My pain during sex is worse. It's because of that. So I often sit with women. It's out of my scope of practice to prescribe hormones.
Of course.
But obviously, I know which doctors in Singapore are open to all of this. And I will often send women off to get, especially the topical vaginal estrogen. The systemic absorption is tiny. The safety of it is very good, but obviously they get counseled by the doctor. But that can make a huge difference. Sometimes that is enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is enough to cure things. It's not necessarily going to cure your stress incontinence ones, but for the urgency ones, it can make a huge difference.
No, I'm just going to say, just sharing more about me. I always feel like it's a good reference point. But I was trying the estrogen cream, but I almost felt like I was reacting to it. But now I'm wondering if it was that nerve that I can't.
The vaginal nerve. So,
yeah.
But were you putting it inside the vagina and then on the outside as well? Were you putting it kind of like actually on the urethra?
No, because the doctor told me just to put it on just like the inside of my labia, which is what I was doing.
Yeah. So I would often get women the cream or the tablet, whatever you're using, needs to go inside the vagina. So you need to kind of lubricate the vaginal walls. But especially if you're having urgency, we definitely want some over there. But there are different types of vaginal estrogen cream. There's a certain one that women don't respond as well to and can have side effects from. And there are others that women do better with. So they're definitely options.
Yes.
There's a product we can't get it here in Singapore yet, but it's available in Australia and the UK. I don't know if you can get it in Canada or not. It's called Presterone, and it's actually a DHEA pessary, so it goes inside the vagina, and then it gets converted to testosterone and estrogen within inside the vagina, and it's amazing. It's really, very, very good. So they're different options. So I definitely, if one hasn't agreed with you, I would ask for something else. If you can tolerate it and it's safe for you to use, it is something I would be saying to most women we should be using once we're going through menopause.
Okay, that's good to know. Maybe I can bug you for that name again afterwards. So I can write it down. Or I guess I can just listen to the podcast when I'm editing it. I just clipped that out myself. Let's talk about sex for a minute. If sex has become predictably uncomfortable, what is the first step to rehabilitating that experience? Is it a tool or is it physiotherapy?
Look, I would always say physio. I mean,
Yeah.
when you say a tool, Andrea, like what are you thinking? Are you thinking like a vibrator or like what are you thinking?
I feel like there's so many options out there. So, I guess I don't really know exactly what I'm thinking.
I think the thing is that a bit of the history is really important. So don't forget there are women who've never had pain-free sex, right? So, and I want to say to all your listeners, sex should never be painful. Okay, so that's really important because some women are very accepting of that. And once again, this is something where they've spoken to their friends and their friends always have pain during sex. We should never have to have pain during sex. So those women who've had pain their whole lives and maybe they've got vulvodynia or vaginismus or there's something going on, they would need sort of a different type of management. But if we're talking about this is a woman who's really had a good sex life, she's never had pain, and as she's sort of going through her 40s and then into her 50s, she's noticing a change in her discomfort. Very typically with that, it is due to the change of the vaginal mucosa. So we're getting that drop in estrogen and the vagina is full of estrogen receptors and the walls become dry. It becomes very like it's rubbing a lot. And so that in itself can cause discomfort. And as a pelvic floor physio, I can have a look, like I can see the mucosa, and then I would obviously recommend some vaginal estrogen. You can get non-hormonal vaginal moisturizers for those women who don't want to use estrogen as well. But the other thing that can change is that we can start to get a bit of a dropping of the organs sometimes. So your bladder, your uterus, your rectum can lose a bit of its support. We can get that when we're younger, but sometimes we see an uptick in that as we sort of go through menopause. Now, if your uterus drops a bit, your cervix becomes lower. Now, your cervix is full of nerve endings. And so there will be a lot of your listeners who will be thinking to themselves, sex is generally okay, but there's certain positions that are really uncomfortable. And those are often the deeper positions. And that's because the penis is hitting the cervix, which is really uncomfortable.
Is that considered prolapse then? Sorry.
So the thing is that the definition of prolapse has changed and it's very much now about symptoms. So very much it's typically women who would say they're feeling a lump or bulge at their vagina. It feels there's pressure at the vagina. It feels like there's a tampon that hasn't been pushed up properly. It's just sitting there. That would be more what the symptoms I would be expecting with women who've got prolapse. Your uterus, only if it's really dropping, like quite, the cervix is dropping quite low to the entrance of the vagina, would we really consider it a prolapse. But remember, your vaginal length is about 10 centimeters, 9 to 10 centimeters. So even if your cervix is dropping to like 5 centimeters, which wouldn't be considered prolapse, that can be uncomfortable in certain positions during sex. There's a device that's been developed for this called the O-Nut. It's made out of silicone. And so you can layer them on and it goes on to an erect penis and it acts like a buffer. So less of the penis is going inside the vagina. And so obviously you can choose how many of these you need. But it can be a game changer for women because the penis is then not hitting the cervix. And so that makes things much more comfortable. But once again, I'm going back to overactive pelvic floor. If our pelvic floor muscles are too tight, that can make sex uncomfortable. So I would definitely be starting with a pelvic health physio who should then be able to really see and clinically reason for the pain during sex and then come up with solutions. But it is definitely not something that I want your listeners to be just grinning and bearing it or just have a glass of wine and, off you go. That is definitely not what I want. And the problem is as well, is I've already mentioned that the pelvic floor is very protective. So what starts to happen is that if we have pain during sex, the brain starts to anticipate there's going to be pain as soon as there's any hint at there's going to be sex. And so pelvic floor will go like this before the penis is anywhere near the vagina. Okay. Yeah. And so we don't want to set up that vicious cycle. We want to stop that basically, because the brain can be really powerful in this situation. And it just makes everything much more difficult.
That just puts your vagina in fight or flight.
100%. And they've done studies on this, and it's amazing. Like women, they show them a scary movie and their pelvic floor switches on and they have no control of it. They're not even thinking about their pelvic floor, but it's very, very, very protective.
What's one pelvic floor hack that you see on TikTok that makes you want to throw your phone across the room?
It's funny, I'm not on TikTok. So I actually had to go and I went online. I was like, look, what's the thing we're seeing on TikTok? And so actually what was coming up is that you need to do your pelvic floor muscle exercises all the time. Like you must squeeze, 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 squeeze. And once again, as we mentioned right in the beginning, it's much more nuanced than that. And what I would love your listeners to take away is that we want a strong pelvic floor, but your pelvic floor needs to be able to let go as well. So with all your listeners now, what I want everyone to try is I want you to just imagine you've got a jelly bean or a blueberry at the entrance of your vagina. I want everyone to take a breath in. And as you breathe out, I want you to think about lifting that blueberry or the jelly bean up towards your head. So what you should feel is a tightening around your vagina, not your glutes, not your buttocks, tightening around vagina. But very importantly now, let that go. And you should now be able to feel the difference between being on and off. And so what I would say is what the TikTok hack is leaving out is that the relaxation part is as important as the squeeze and lift part.
Right.
Okay. So pelvic floor muscles have to let go. I explain this to my patients like your biceps, right? So imagine if you walked around with your biceps like this all day. Over time, your biceps are going to get shorter, they're going to get tighter, but they're also going to get weaker. So if I then want to use my arm, my biceps are like, I can't do that, right? So if your pelvic floor muscles are staying in this on position all the time, and then we need them to be able to let go in order to give a good squeeze, they can't do that. They're already shortened, they're fatigued before we even start. So if we're going to strengthen, we have to be able to switch on, but we have to be able to switch off. And if you think you can't do that, then doing lots of pelvic muscle exercises or Kegels is not the right thing for you until you've been checked. If you are comfortable, you can insert a finger or a thumb inside your vagina. You can do it when you're in the shower, and you should be able to try and lift your finger up towards your head, and you should feel it let go. If you can't feel anything, it might be the muscles are weak or they're overactive. But if your finger's being pushed out into the floor, that means you're completely doing it wrong, which a lot of women do, and that can also make things worse.
So make sure you use your finger and not an actual blueberry.
Yes, please don't use a blueberry or a jelly bean. Imaginary. Please don't. I don't want to get any funny emails like, I stuck a blueberry up and I'm in the ER. Can you imagine? No, please, everybody, it's imaginary. Blueberries, imaginary jelly beans.
If a woman only has 5 minutes a day for her pelvic floor, what is the one exercise that she should be prioritizing? Is that it? The one?
No, actually, I was going to say doing some diaphragmatic breathing because the diaphragm and the pelvic floor actually work together like a piston effect. So when and actually this is important for me to explain because a lot of women think that when you activate your pelvic floor, you need to breathe in. So you need to do a like that. But actually the way the system works, so if this is your diaphragm and this is your pelvic floor, when we breathe in, our lungs fill with air, okay? And that actually pushes the diaphragm down. So when we breathe in, the diaphragm pushes down. That pushes on our intestine, and in turn, that pushes on our pelvic floor. So when we breathe in, our pelvic floor lengthens. As we exhale, everything naturally recoils, and the pelvic floor lifts. So there is a natural piston effect between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. So if we can reestablish diaphragmatic breathing, because most women don't breathe with their diaphragm, they breathe with the upper chest. But if we can reestablish that, we can actually help pelvic floor in a huge way because we can try to establish that automatic activation. Remember I said You're not meant to be overthinking your pelvic floor. So, my patients who come to me and they're runners and they're leaking when they're running, they're like, oh, I'm trying to switch my pelvic floor on when I'm running. You can't do that. You're actually going to make things worse because you're going to end up breath holding and creating a downward pressure and making the leaking worse. If I can get their pelvic floor to activate on exhalation and get them to breathe, often we can make a huge difference. And I say to them, now when you're running, just concentrate on your belly breathing. Just breathe. And we should get that automatic activation of pelvic floor. So the one exercise I would get everyone to do is one hand on your chest, one hand just under your ribs. And I want you to concentrate your breath into your bottom hand and out. And you could even think of your pelvic floor as you breathe in. Think of the pelvic floor lengthening and softening. And then just don't even think about it when you breathe out. Just let it go. And one more, breathing into under your ribs and out. So what I don't want is this.
Right.
That's
Your
what we
shoulders
don't.
should stay down. They shouldn't
Yes.
even move.
Yeah. So 5 diaphragmatic breaths, morning and evening. It's great for your nervous system. It calms everything down. That is what I would actually get everybody to do, because we don't know who's overactive and who's not, and this will be good for everybody.
Perfect. What is the biggest aha moment your clients have had in their 50s that has changed their life?
Realizing that there's something that can be done. I think understanding that surgery is not necessarily the best way forward, and that there's great options for conservative management. One of the big aha moments my patients often have is women who are constipated. What they don't realize is that one of the things you can do to improve constipation is going immediately on urge. And this has got to do with the anal sphincters. So we've got an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter. And the inside one we cannot control. It's made up of what's called smooth muscle. But basically what happens is when that internal anal sphincter gets triggered and opens, that's when we get the urge to poo. But it only stays open for about 10, maximum 15 minutes. So if we don't want to poo for whatever reason, and I joke with my patients, you don't want to poo, your husband's in the house, or, you've got a phone call to make, or like whatever it is.
You're not at home, you're at the mall.
Home, you're at the mall, and then whatever, like half an hour later, you're like, okay, now I can go. That internal anal sphincter has shut, and you're pooing against a closed internal anal sphincter, and that's when we end up pushing and straining. The other thing is that the walls of the rectum, the poo, it starts to lose moisture through the walls of the rectum if it's just sitting there in the rectum, because the rectum's not designed to store poo. It's meant to come in and go out. And so those two things combined can actually make us constipated. So one of the biggest aha moments when we're talking about bowel function is going as soon as you have that urge. And if you're pooing on urge, you should be done pooing within 1 to 2 minutes. People who are going to the toilet and sitting there for 20 to 30 minutes, like the men with their iPads, that's a problem, right? We shouldn't be doing that. We should be done within a couple of minutes. So I often say, if you're at lunch and you feel like the urge, just go and you'll be back within a few minutes, right? But that is a big aha moment, because there's such a close connection between bowel issues and bladder issues and pelvic floor issues. So often we can't sort out what's going on with the bladder until we fix what's going on with the bowels. So the bowel management piece is super important.
Is there anything else that you feel that we missed that you want to touch on?
Look, I think what we're seeing more and more are women getting osteopenia earlier. So osteopenia is the precursor to osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm.
We know that as we go through menopause and our estrogen drops, that we start to lose bone density. And it's known as the silent disease because obviously we're not aware of it until we have a fracture. But it can be, it's one of the things, if women get a hip fracture later in life, it can be the thing that leads them into a care home, and it can also lead to death because there's, repercussions of that. Yeah. So it's really important that women are doing strength training. They're doing resistance training. And I'm a big proponent of Pilates, but you're not going to get your strength training from that. Even sometimes runners can still develop osteopenia and osteoporosis because the bones need variety. if we can't do the same thing again and again and again, we have to mix it up. That's what bones respond to in terms of building.
Right.
So it's fairly heavy weights. We need to be doing it at about 3 times a week. You can do some impact stuff as well and some jumps, but obviously if they're pelvic floor issues, then we modify that. But I always recommend that if women don't know where to start, they start with a personal trainer. They learn their technique. They understand what to do. You obviously have to build up. But we're really trying to encourage women to incorporate more of that bone protective exercise now.
Why do you think there's an increase of women getting osteopenia?
I think we become more sedentary. Also, is it a case of we screening more? Is it, and that's why we're more aware of it, because like I know in Singapore now, kind of if you're going in to get hormone replacement, often they're recommending a DEXA scan at the same time, which is the scan that they do to check for bone density. Also, we build our bone bank when we are children and teenagers. Like by the time we're in our 20s, we've got 90% of our bone bank, our bone density that we will have for the rest of our lives, basically.
Wow.
And then we start to draw off that bone bank. Our children and teenagers becoming more sedentary. If you think of kind of like when we were kids, how we used to sort of run around, is that getting less and less and less now because of the computers and phones and iPads? I don't know, but it's something I'm very aware of with my kids, like making sure they're doing enough activities where there's enough jumping, bounding. My son's 17 now, he goes to the gym and he does weights, but kids that are too young to do weights, like what are they doing? It's important. It's really important.
When does your bone bank kind of like end? Like when's the cap time for?
Well, I think by our 30s, we're already starting to lose bone density, and then obviously accelerates. So by our 20s, we've got 90% of it, and I think by our 30s, we're already starting to drop off. So, by us doing the high impact and the resistance at our age, we can slow it down, right? Yeah. We would never be able to reverse it to what it was, but we can slow it down. And then often if we add estrogen, if we no longer have estrogen in our system, often if we add estrogen, that can also help as well. It's really something that we should be looking at preventative, not trying to put out the fire once it's already a problem.
Yeah.
The thinner boned women, they are more at risk as well. If you've got a history of eating disorders, anorexia, you're more at risk.
Right.
If you're a smoker, if you don't eat well, alcohol, there's all sorts of risk factors that come into it. But the main thing that I want to talk about is from the exercise perspective.
Right. Well, that's good to know. Honestly, I had no idea. Thanks for tuning in to the Fuck You 50s. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate the podcast. And we would love to connect with you on Instagram. So be sure to follow us at the Fuck You 50s. The Fuck You 50s is hosted by Andrea Claire. See you next time.